hosting this time. This is a conversation at the end of the day, after all the votes are over here on the House floor and all the hustle and bustle and everything, and we had a chance just to shut down and be able to talk about issues like this week being National Marriage Week. Just for a moment to be able to pause on an area that we really do agree on as a Congress and so many people can gather around. To celebrate marriage, what marriage has been in our own families, what it means in our nation. 20 years ago, this May, I watched my bride walk in with her wedding dress, and I could never begin to explain the emotion of that. It's a moment I will never forget, seeing her smile and thinking for the rest of my life, I'm going to get to spend it with that lady. Love is an amazing thing, but marriage is not just love, it is commitment. It is the foundation of our culture. It is the very essence of what we call family. For me, as a follower of Jesus Christ, I also understand that marriage is one of the few things to survive the fall of man. Marriage existed in the Garden of Eden, and it still exists today. And while I fully appreciate and understand the dynamics of single parenting, growing up in a single-parent home myself, I watched my mom dedicate her life to myself and my brother, and how hard she worked. But I can tell you from her perspective and from no person I've ever met, have they picked up a newborn child and they've looked in that newborn's face and said, I hope this child grows, gets great grades, goes to a good college, gets married, and then gets divorced. No one does that. Because as a culture, we understand the value of marriage. It's intrinsic within us that we get it, and we honor that. We see an elderly couple in the park and see them smiling at each other, and we wonder about how many decades they've spent together, and we honor them as a culture because they have strived for so many years and been committed for so many years to each other. And it is to be honored. And it's a good thing for us to stop in just a moment in the hustle of this day and to honor marriage again. But let me just say as a government as well, marriage is a big deal to us because there's a direct proportion. The weaker our families are, the more government has to stand up and provide services. The stronger our families are, the less there is a need for government. You'll see it in law enforcement, you'll see it in social services, you'll see it in food stamps, on and on and on. The stronger our families are, the less government we need. And as our families collapse, we have an acceleration of government to try to fit in the gaps. It is this uniting aspect of our culture. White, black, Latino, Asian, American Indian, every race, faith. Family is the key, and the marriage is the essence of that. Quick story. A few weeks ago at the Martin Luther King Day festivities in Oklahoma City, Paco Valderrama, who works the gang unit within Oklahoma City's police department, he's a fantastic officer with a terrific reputation in our community, stood up and he began to talk about marriage and about families. And he made a statement. He said, of all the gang arrests that they do and of all the gang interventions that they do in Oklahoma City, he said 1% of the gang members that I pick up come from married, intact families. 1%. The more our families fall apart, the more government has to rise up. Intact families, you have a lower risk of drug use in those kids, of crime in those kids, of poverty, and passing on poverty to the next generation. They have safer homes with less abuse. They have less risk of early sexual activity, all because they become from a family that is married and committed to each other. We should maintain that in our federal policies, that in every way possible, we support marriage, not discourage marriage. A great example of that is the marriage penalty that's in SSI right now. If you're on disability insurance and you're single, you get one payment. But if you're married, it's much lower. You're single, you can have one amount, and you can have one amount of assets, but if you're married, it's less. So it basically is a disincentive for a person on SSI to be married. I personally interacted with people in Oklahoma City that have been living together for years. And when I asked them about it and said, why don't you get married? Why don't you settle this commitment? His response to me was, I can't afford to do that. I'll lose part of my SSI benefits. We as a government should do everything we can to make sure there are no marriage penalties in any of our social service programs, because the best thing that can be done to help pull families out of poverty is a stable, strong home. And when there's a stable, strong marriage, that will build up families. And the more we step in as a government and say, I know your family's falling apart, but we're just going to subsidize you. In fact, we'll subsidize you to a level that you don't have to get married. In fact, we discourage you from getting married. It's absurd on its face. The cultural thing that pulls us all together, every race, every religion, is the marriage being the center of that home. And for every family that I've ever talked with, the hope for their children is that they're married and they stay married. It is still a core foundation of our culture, as many marriages have fallen apart. But we should, as a nation, stand beside marriage. It's a great week. It's always a great week, though, to celebrate National Marriage Week. With that, I yield back.